Common carp. Here's why this fish outlasted almost every civilization that tried to farm it. The common carp originated in Central Asia and Eastern Europe, but selective breeding and deliberate introduction have carried it to every continent except Antarctica, making it one of the most widely distributed freshwater fish alive today. Watch how thick and muscular this fish's body is compared to almost any native species sharing its water. That build is exactly why it can survive conditions that wipe out competitors. Common carp typically run 12 to 25 pounds, though the current all-tackle world record sits at 75 pounds, caught in France in 2010. Here's the incredible part. Common carp can survive in waters so oxygen-poor and polluted that most other fish species would die within hours, tolerating temperature swings and murky conditions that would finish off trout or bass entirely. But this success came with an unexpected consequence. That same toughness is exactly why common carp have become invasive almost everywhere they've been introduced outside their native range, rooting through riverbeds while feeding and stirring up sediment which smothers native plants and destroys spawning habitat other fish depend on. But the next entry on this list isn't really a separate species at all. It's what happens when humans take this exact same fish and turn it into something people are willing to pay a fortune for.
Koi fish.
At first glance, this next fish doesn't look like it belongs anywhere near a muddy river carp, but genetically, it's the exact same species as the common carp, Cyprinus carpius, reshaped by centuries of selective breeding in Japan into some of the most visually striking fish on the planet, prized for bold patterns of white, red, black, orange, and gold. Here's why collectors pay astonishing prices for them. Rare, high-grade koi with exceptional coloring and pattern symmetry have sold at auction for well over $1 million, making them among the most expensive fish in the entire world. Watch how deliberately these patterns are bred. Nothing about a prize koi's coloring is accidental. Generations of selective pairing go into a single fish. Koi can also live for decades, with some documented individuals reportedly surviving over 100 years, and their intelligence enough to recognize their owners and learn to feed directly from a person's hand. Even stranger though, despite their glamorous reputation, koi that escape into the wild revert to plain, common carp coloring within just a few generations and become just as invasive as their ancestors. Even stranger than $1 million fish though is what happens when that same species develops almost no scales at all.
Amur carp and leather carp. These next two aren't separate species either, but they look different enough that most anglers assume they are. Amur carp are a scale pattern variant of the common carp, carrying only a handful of oversized, irregular scales scattered across an otherwise smooth body, a mutation European anglers have specifically bred and prized in specialty fisheries for generations. Leather carp take that same mutation even further, appearing almost completely scaleless, with only a thin, rubbery, leather-like skin covering the entire body. Compare that to the common carp we just covered, and the difference is startling for a fish that's genetically almost identical. Both varieties grow to the same impressive sizes as standard common carp and are extremely popular in European carp fishing, where specialized lakes are stocked specifically with trophy mirror and leather carp that anglers travel internationally just to target. Here's where things get interesting though. The next 4 fish on this list aren't beloved by anglers at all. They're actively being hunted down by government agencies across an entire country.
Grass carp. The next carp was imported to solve one environmental problem, and it accidentally created another that scientists are still fighting today. Grass carp were brought into the United States in the 1960s and 70s specifically to control excessive aquatic vegetation in ponds and waterways. They grow up to about 3 feet long and 65 pounds, with scales distinctly outlined in dark pigment, and true to their name, they can consume an amount of aquatic plant material equal to their entire body weight every single day. That voracious appetite is exactly the problem. Once grass carp escapes confinement through floods and accidental releases, they began stripping native aquatic vegetation from entire ecosystems, destroying habitat that native fish and waterfowl depend on to survive. Grass carp are now considered one of the 4 so-called invasive carp species currently threatening the Mississippi River Basin.
Silver carp. At first glance, this next fish looks completely harmless, but one behavior has injured dozens of boaters across the American Midwest. Imagine you're cruising down the Mississippi River when a fish weighing 40 pounds suddenly launches itself out of the water directly at your boat at highway speed. That's silver carp, famous or infamous for leaping up to 10 feet straight out of the water in response to boat motors, passing trains, or even the sound of geese taking off nearby. Growing to nearly 3 feet long, silver carp are filter feeders, straining plankton directly out of the water column at an incredibly efficient rate, which lets them outcompete native filter-feeding fish for the base of the entire food chain. They were originally imported for aquaculture and water treatment facilities, but after escaping into the Mississippi River basin, silver carp populations exploded so dramatically in some stretches of river that they now make up the majority of fish biomass present. Scientists are still trying to understand exactly how far these fish will ultimately spread, since silver carp are considered one of the single greatest threats to the Great Lakes ecosystem if they manage to establish a foothold there.
Bighead carp. Unlike silver carp, which explode out of the water the moment they're startled, the next species almost never breaks the surface at all, which is one of the easiest ways biologists tell the two apart in the field. Named for its oversized blunt head and disproportionately large eyes, the bighead carp can grow up to nearly 5 feet long and over 90 pounds, making it one of the largest invasive carp species currently established in American waters. Like its silver carp relative, it feeds by filtering plankton from the water, and the two species are frequently found together in the same infested river systems. Bighead carp reproduce explosively in turbulent, fast-flowing rivers with drifting eggs and larvae that can travel for miles downstream before finding suitable nursery habitat to mature in.
Black carp. This next species nearly went unnoticed by wildlife agencies for years, right up until biologists realized it was quietly wiping out endangered mussels along the way. Nicknamed the snail carp, the black carp is the largest of the 4 Asian carp currently invading American waterways, capable of exceeding 6 feet in length and 150 pounds. Unlike its plant-eating and plankton-filtering relatives, the black carp has a highly specialized diet built almost entirely around snails and mollusks, which it crushes using powerful pharyngeal teeth located deep in its throat. But this success came with an unexpected consequence of its own. Black carp were originally imported specifically to control snail populations that spread parasites harmful to farmed fish, genuinely useful in aquaculture. But once introduced outside their native range, they became a serious threat to native mussel and snail populations instead, several of which are already endangered and can't survive the added predation pressure. Not every carp on this list is causing an ecological disaster, though. In fact, the next one has been quietly surviving in ponds that would kill almost any other fish on Earth.
Crucian carp. This next species has a survival trick that sounds almost impossible. The Crucian carp, a European relative of the goldfish that notably lacks barbels, can survive for months trapped beneath ice in oxygen-depleted ponds by converting lactic acid buildup into alcohol and releasing it through its gills, essentially avoiding the toxic buildup that would kill most other fish in the exact same conditions. Crucian carp are smaller than common carp, typically staying well under 10 pounds, and their remarkable resilience has allowed them to persist for centuries in isolated garden ponds and small lakes across Europe, some of which have supported the same Crucian carp populations for generations without any human intervention at all.
Prussian carp. This next species has one of the strangest reproductive strategies in the entire animal kingdom. Closely related to both the Crucian carp and the common goldfish, the Prussian carp, also known as Jebel carp, reproduces in many populations through a process called gynogenesis, where eggs are triggered to develop using sperm from an entirely different species, without any of that sperm's genetic material actually being incorporated, effectively producing all-female clone populations. That bizarre reproductive shortcut has helped Prussian carp spread rapidly and become invasive across parts of Europe, since a population can theoretically establish itself and expand without a single male of its own species present at all.
Amur carp. The Amur carp is considered by many researchers to be the original wild ancestor from which the modern domesticated common carp, and by extension, koi, mirror carp, and leather carp, were all eventually developed. Native to the Amur River basin along the border of Russia and China, it retains a leaner, more streamlined wild body shape compared to the rounder, deeper-bodied domesticated carp familiar to most anglers today.